Welcome to Unlocking the Dream Vision. I'm your host, author R.J. von-Bruening. In this video series, we will be exploring the mysterious Dream Vision of Enoch, as explored in my book, Unlocking the Dream Vision, The Secret History of Creation. In this video, we will explore when the gods came to earth. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and subscribe for future videos. This series presents information based in part upon theory and conjecture of the system of esoteric symbolism. The purpose is to suggest some possible interpretation, but not necessarily the only one, to the many mysteries we will explore. Welcome to When the Gods Came to Earth. We have now reached the most popular, the most famous, and the single best remembered part of not only the Dream Vision, but also of the Book of Enoch in general. The fall of Lucifer and his fellow watchers with their corruption of humanity. Within the monotheistic religions of the world, this is the story of when Lucifer with his fellow angels rebelled against the Most High, thereby falling from heavenly grace and corrupting mankind in the process. All three of the major monotheistic religions have normally glossed over or tried very hard to minimize this entire event within their teachings and traditions. Although the monotheistic religions of the world tend to minimize this event, it is in fact one of the best remembered stories on the planet. It is remembered in some version by almost every single ancient culture and tradition the world over. And it does truly appear to be a universal story of humanity, much like the Great Flood story of the ancient world. Within the monotheistic religions, this is a story of when Lucifer, the greatest of the angels of God, came to earth to live among mankind, bringing knowledge and enlightenment to all of humanity. Although the monotheistic tradition views this enlightenment as a great sin with the corruption of humanity and a crime against God and nature that eventually results in the Great Flood. But the rest of the world remembers this as a great and monumental event. One of the primary reasons why this was and is thought to have been a great beneficial event for humanity was not only because this great Lord of Light brought divine knowledge and enlightenment, but he also brought freedom to a brutally enslaved people. It is rather easy to understand just why the monotheistic religions of the world would want to overlook this or try to remove or minimize this part from their teachings, for it simply paints the God of the biblical tradition as in a very poor light that makes him the oppressor and an enslaver of humanity. It also presents his arch enemy Lucifer as the true benefactor of humanity, at least in the beginning. Once you realize this, then it becomes easy to understand how this is one of the major reasons why the Book of Enoch was removed from the biblical canon. This coming of the great Lord of Light is also the mysterious event that gives birth to two of the most famous and often misunderstood mystical symbols in the entire world, the five-pointed star and the triangle. Not only will we begin to learn the origin of these two mysterious symbols, it is also the point where the symbolism of the bull that we started to explore in the last video begins to become important. We'll begin with the next part of the dream vision with its symbolic fall of Lucifer and his fellow watchers. And again I saw with my eyes as I slept, and I saw the heaven above, and behold, a star fell from heaven, and it arose and ate and pastured among those oxen. And after that I saw the large and the black oxen, and beheld that they all changed their stalls and pastures and their cattle, and began to live with one another. And again I saw in the vision and looked towards the heaven, and behold, I saw many stars descend and cast themselves down from the heaven to that first star, and they became bulls among those cattle, and pastured with them amongst them. Book of Enoch, chapter 86, verses 1 through 3. As we begin our journey into this set of verses from the dream vision by starting first with the symbolism of the star that fell from heaven. The star that fell from heaven is, of course, the leader of the fallen angels or watchers that fell from heaven. Almost all mistakenly know this fallen star as the devil, or more commonly as Satan, But at a much later point in the story, you will come to understand that Lucifer and Satan are in fact referring to two completely different things. Within the Western biblical tradition, this leader of the fallen angels is not normally referred to as Satan, but is normally referred to by his ancient Latin name, Lucifer, which means the morning star. Interestingly enough, in Latin, when used as a noun, the word Lucifer means morning star. But when it is used as an adjective and applied to the moon, Lucifer means light bringing or light bringer. These ancient meanings to the name Lucifer and its general use in the biblical tradition has normally been quite the mystery over the years for those who have studied the Bible. Many have often wondered why he is called the morning star. But now, with just one line from the Dream Vision of Enoch, you can begin understanding that Lucifer, the Latin name for the morning star, makes perfect sense. Not only does this answer one of the bigger mysteries of the biblical tradition, but the word itself helps provide additional information of when this event must have occurred, which must have been early in the morning, hence the name Lucifer, the morning star. He was the star that fell from heaven who brought divine light and knowledge and freedom to humanity one early morning. This is also the next example of how the mystical symbolism is used and how each part adds to the overall esoteric story. This monumental event of where Enoch says he beheld a star fell from heaven in the early morning is remembered in some version in every single ancient tradition and culture that we know of. The monotheistic religions may remember him as Lucifer, the angel that rebelled against God. But to the ancient Greeks, he was the mighty Zeus, or sometimes even Apollo. In ancient Rome, he was Jupiter. For the Egyptians, he was Horus. In ancient India, he was known as Shiva. To the ancient Mayan, he was Kukulkan, the plumed serpent. And to the Aztec, he was known as the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl. These are just a small sample of the many different gods commonly known as the Great Lord of Light, or bringers of light. They are also just a small sample of the many different traditional names from ancient stories from around the world that remember this event when a great Lord of Light came down from the sky to live among humanity, appearing as a star that fell from heaven. Not only did he come to live among humanity, but he's also remembered as imparting divine wisdom with knowledge of the heavens and the general enlightenment of all humanity, thereby lifting us out of a great dark age of ignorance and brutal slavery, bringing us into the light of knowledge and freedom. This then brings us to the meaning of the mystical symbolism of the five-pointed star, or pentagram, as it is more commonly known. This idea that the pentagram is related to the fallen angel Lucifer and even Satanism or devil worship is still remembered to this very day within the monotheistic religions, especially Western Christianity. Although this idea is common knowledge, almost all miss the additional mystical meaning hidden within the actual symbol of the pentagram itself. This mystical meaning of the pentagram is that it also holds encoded mathematical knowledge that is believed to have come directly from the great Lord of Light himself. This is the next secret to understanding the mystical symbolism, that many of the esoteric symbols also are geometric symbols, which in turn can only be understood if you have a basic knowledge of geometry and mathematics. In this case of the pentagram is not actually a demonic symbol used to summon evil spirits as commonly believed by so many of the faithful. But it is in fact a geometric symbol that holds the golden ratio. This is the next secret to understanding the mystical symbolism, that many of the esoteric symbols are also geometric symbols, which in turn can only be understood if you have a basic knowledge of geometry and mathematics. In the case of the pentagram, it is not actually a demonic symbol that's used to summon evil spirits as commonly believed by so many of the faithful. But it is in fact a geometric symbol that holds the golden ratio of geometry. This is the hidden meaning that makes this symbol so important. When combined, we can begin to realize that this simple symbol not only represents the actual star that fell from heaven that one early morning, but it also contains an important example of the divine knowledge that the great Lord of Light imparted upon humanity. In order to understand this divine mathematical knowledge encoded within the simple pentagram, all we have to do is take any one of the 5 lines that make up the pentagram and label them A, B, C, and D. As we can see in this figure, the original line, AD, is bisected at 2 points, B and C. This breaks the original line into 3 line segments, with a 4th one if we include the original line AD. When these 4 line segments are put into the proper order from the shortest to the longest, you will get the golden ratio of geometry, which when combined with simple fractions and basic algebra, you get the entire mathematical framework of harmonics, music, art, engineering, basic physics, and natural geometry. This is one of the great mysteries that the esoteric religion commonly speaks of, and why geometry is so central to their teachings. And this is what makes the pentagram so special to the followers of the esoteric religions, is because they believe that this symbol of the pentagram, with its encoded mathematical knowledge, not only represents the monumental event of the star falling from heaven, but that it also holds some of the actual divine knowledge that was imparted to humanity from the great Lord of Light himself. It is simply viewed as a direct connection to this great event in a similar fashion as Christians view the symbol of the crucifix or cross as a direct connection to their Savior and his sacrifices upon it. The primary difference between the two being that the symbol of the pentagram contains additional coded mathematical information, whereas the cross or crucifix of Christianity does not appear to contain any of the same mathematical information. This is one of the primary reasons why the general public misunderstands these ancient symbols. It is also another example of how effective this mystical, symbolic encoding system of the ancient scribes actually is. Unlike the Christian cross, the pentagram represents more than just the event. It also contains additional esoteric knowledge that can only be properly understood if and only if you understand the other details and aspects of the mystical symbolism and the hidden story it holds, which, as you are already starting to learn, is impossible to do without the help of the symbolic dream vision. This incredible event of the great Lord of Light coming to Earth also led to the next well-known symbol, the triangle. But unlike the pentagram, the symbolism of the triangle and its relationship to this event is not so quite clear-cut or easy to understand. Not only is it not easy to understand, it is something most of you will most likely dismiss out of hand. This is because, as with the story of the first men, it goes against everything you have ever been taught to think or believe. It is also the next point whereby us not having the luxury of a long initiation involving a long comprehensive training and education into ritual and ceremony will work against us. Additionally, it has only one small piece of evidence in a highly misunderstood tradition to support any of it. Although the next part of the story is not contained within the dream vision nor the Bible, it is based upon information contained within both, but is not widely remembered within the biblical tradition in general. Also, many will regard it more as a myth or legend because it does not appear to be remembered in any other known ancient tradition. Additionally, it is possibly the best example of esoteric knowledge that has been hidden from the public sphere. But as you will learn, it does answer some lingering questions about why the symbol of the triangle is so important and how it is directly related to the monumental event of the great Lord of Light coming down to earth like a star that fell from the heaven. We first begin with the information from the dream vision, whereby the star that fell from heaven and that it came to the black oxen, which we now understand to be the line of Cain. As we are told in the biblical story, Cain was exiled from the land of Eden after murdering his brother Abel. Within the book of Genesis, we are told that Cain's exile was to the mysterious land of Nod, on the east of Eden. If we combine this information from Genesis concerning Cain's exile with our new knowledge that the first men were Neanderthal, along with our modern understanding of where Neanderthal lived based on his fossil remains, we can safely surmise that the descendants of the Black Bull, also remembered as Cain in the Bible, must have lived in the area we know today as northern and northeastern Africa. which based upon the Neanderthal remains would place them somewhere in and around the Nile Valley of the northeastern Africa. Which again would mean that the Neanderthal remains found in and around this area of northern Africa could be related to the legendary line of patriarchs of the Bible and the line of Cain. If we take this idea and return to the biblical story of Genesis with its account that the land of Nod was on the east of Eden, we can surmise that the Nile Valley could possibly be this legendary land of Nod, which if true would place the land of Eden to the western side of the Nile River Valley, which we all know today is the area of eastern part of the vast Sahara Desert. Although it is a vast desert today, 200,000 years ago at the time of Neanderthal, it was a lush land with huge inland lakes, much larger than today's largest lakes. So large, in fact, that they should more or less be referred to as inland freshwater seas to better describe them. This brings us to the next important point that works against us, because if this line of thinking is correct, then this would mean what is known as the Eastern Sahara Desert is actually part of the land of Eden, which according to Genesis, the Garden of Eden was located somewhere within this eastern part of the land of Eden. This would then place the mythical Garden of Paradise somewhere in the areas of modern-day nation of Libya. Given the vague information of the biblical text, it's also possible that the fabled Garden of Eden could be underwater in the most southern part of the Mediterranean Sea, just off the coast of modern-day Libya. If this radical and heretical idea that the ancient mysterious land of Egypt could be the mysterious lost legendary land of Nod spoken within the book of Genesis, then this would mean that the land of Egypt was the location of this monumental event of the great Lord of Light coming to earth as a star falling from heaven. The star that came and lived among the black oxen, or as we understand the line of Cain in the land of Nod. It's hard for us to imagine the massive impact this would have had on the first men that had witnessed and experienced it. This was the unbelievable event of the great Lord of Light coming down to earth in order to free humanity from a brutal and cruel enslavement that had gone on for countless generations. It must have seemed like the greatest of miracles that had been wished for by untold generations that had been slaves. And that one fateful morning, a star fell from heaven, and then everyone was free. It must have seemed like their prayers had been answered as they were brought out of the great darkness into the light of knowledge and civilization, with the equally important knowledge of good and evil. I think we could all agree that it is safe to assume that this earth-shattering and society-changing event would be remembered and celebrated. It would, of course, also be commemorated by building an equally great monument to honor such an unbelievably great event. Also, it could not just be any monument. It would have to be the single greatest monument of all monuments that could last until the very end of time if need be. For all needed to remember, just not the important event of the Lord of Light coming to earth, but also the very spot that it occurred upon. Common sense tells us that not only would it be built on the very location of this great event, but it would also be designed in such a way that the people would always remember what had happened on this spot and when it had occurred. If you already had not figured it out, I am of course referring to the single greatest monument ever built by humans, the Great Pyramid upon the Giza Plateau in Egypt. I know hearing this for the first time might be a bit much to swallow for almost all, but as we have already begun to learn, if the legendary land of Nod was to the east of the land of Eden, was in and around the northern parts of the Nile Valley, then logic dictates that this would be the most probable location of where the star that fell from heaven and who first lived among the black oxen would have occurred. In addition, if we take a moment and think about the physical layout of the Giza Plateau, it would be a good choice for such a site because it is naturally the highest point in the area and it can be seen for many miles in every direction. When we combine this heretical idea with our new knowledge of the mystical animal symbolism of the black bull, It allows us to begin understanding one of the greatest mysteries of the original ancient name of Egypt, Kemet. The direct and original meaning of this word Kemet means black land. It has traditionally been believed that this ancient name came from the rich, dark soil along the banks of the Nile River, where the first ancient settlements began. But now, with our esoteric knowledge of the mystical animal symbolism from the dream vision, we can begin to now understand that it is much more probable that it's because that this was the land of the black bulls, first settled by and remembered in the biblical story as Cain. Our next step is to understand where the shape of the triangle comes from. In order to understand this, we need to figure out when this event could have occurred. The secret to this mystery is to realize that it must be based on what was seen in the early morning sky at the time as the star fell from heaven. This is also the next part in understanding how the mystical symbolism begins to tie different parts of the story into a larger esoteric story. This begins with understanding that the symbolism of the bull represents the first men, and these first men are the ones we know today as Neanderthal. The next part is to realize that the mystical symbolism of the bull is also recorded and remembered in the night sky as the constellation of Taurus, the bull. This is the next piece of the puzzle that allows us to begin understanding that the symbolism of the bull representing the first men is the common feature that ties many seemingly unrelated events into a larger, more coherent story. Additionally, if we look at the fossil record of Neanderthal, we find an important clue that has been overlooked, a clue that will aid us in figuring out in time where this monumental event may have occurred. If we look at the fossil record of Neanderthal, we find that starting approximately 150,000 BC, we begin to see Neanderthals start migrating from northeastern Africa outward across the Eurasian landmass into southern Europe. It has been theorized that the main driver for this expansion into new lands was due to the increase in population that forced them to move into new areas looking for resources and food. In addition, modern genetic evidence placed the origin of our own genetic line at approximately 160,000 BC. If we take these two numbers and go back into time and look at the area around the constellation of Taurus in the night sky, we'll find something extraordinary. We'll find that the three brightest stars in this part of the night sky create a triangle with an almost perfect match to the shape of the Great Pyramid, including the same odd 52-degree angle that so many have wondered about over the centuries. What makes this even more extraordinary is that it allows us to realize that at the right time of the year, in the early morning hours before sunrise, while standing to the west of where the Great Pyramid stands today looking toward the eastern horizon, you would see these three bright stars making the exact same triangular shape in the early morning sky superimposed over the Great Pyramid. The three bright stars that make up this great event are Betelgeuse, Rigel, and Aldebaran, which are the three brightest stars in the constellation of Orion the Hunter and Taurus the Bull. Now this is where it begins to get a little on the strange side of things. If you use modern astronomy software that projects the night sky as it would have looked in the past and looked at this part of the night sky, you will not see this almost perfect match between these three bright stars in the Great Pyramid. In fact, you will find that there is not any available astronomy software on the market that goes back this far in time. Additionally, if you perform the calculations by hand for the movement of these stars beyond 100,000 years, you will still not get a perfect match as I have described. However, if you use a little-known discrepancy about the historical position of the star of Aldebaran instead of the accepted modern numbers, it does. This discrepancy with regards to the position of the star within the constellation of Taurus the Bull was first discovered by Sir Edward Halley in 1717, when he compared contemporary positions of the star to the ancient positions recorded in the Almagest. It is a strange discrepancy that has never been resolved over the centuries, with none of the possibilities presented over the years truly explaining it, with the most common idea being that there are errors in the writings of the actual positions as they were recorded by our ancient ancestors. Another one is perhaps there were recording errors that were made in the 17th and 18th centuries. The other possibility could be that there were errors in Halley's original calculations, or he just plainly misidentified the star, both which seem highly unlikely given his other works. The only plausible and final resolution to this problem will most likely require finding Halley's original calculations and papers on the matter, which oddly have been missing since his death in 1742. If we use Halley's original positional data and movement on Aldebaran instead of the modern one, an incredibly extraordinary thing happens. The three brightest stars in this part of the night sky form an almost perfect 52-degree triangle shape in the sky that matches the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau. What's even more extraordinary is that you must go back in time to about 150,000 BC, give or take 10,000 years, for these three stars to move into this position to make the shape from their current positions of today, as we can see in this image. It is also well known that when the Great Pyramid was originally completed, its outer casing stones were made of a highly polished white limestone. It's easy to imagine how this huge mountain of polished white limestone would have shone brilliantly in the sunlight. It's also easy to imagine that it would be especially striking in the early morning hours of dawn as the sun rose in the east with the last traces of darkness lingering in the west. It would shine like a great morning star. The great morning star they call Lucifer. As I said before, you can now understand that outside of the possible star alignment, there's very little actual evidence supporting any part of the story. In fact, you might even be rather skeptical of the entire idea. But what is important to understand here is that this is the great event that forever links to this symbol, the triangle. This time of when a star fell from heaven to live among the black bulls, who brought divine enlightenment and freedom to a brutally enslaved people. Although there is not much backing up this story, it is important to understand at this point in our journey that it is not important if the story is really true or not. What is important to understand that this should be viewed like the Passion story and the resurrection of Jesus Christ within Christianity, with a focus on how these stories give birth to the meaning behind the Christian symbol, the crucifix. It does not actually matter if the Passion story and the resurrection of the Christ actually happened or if you personally believe it to be true or false. What is important is to understand that there are people who do believe that it happened and the cross became the symbol forever tied to this event because of their belief. The symbol of the triangle is exactly the same, and that is the symbol became forever linked to this great and monumental event of the great Lord of Light coming to earth to live among humans, bringing freedom and knowledge to all. Additionally, on a much more practical level, after the Lord of Light had brought freedom and civilization to a brutally enslaved people, a grand building project like the Great Pyramid begins to make sense. It would have been an ideal way to utilize the existing skills and infrastructure of these newly freed people. It would also have the benefit of keeping the local population busy as a new society was created, one that was not built upon slavery and exploitation. It would also help explain how these great stones that make up this great building were moved, because Neanderthal was naturally much stronger than the average modern human of today. They were short, strong, and built like a bull. Very good design for moving around large masses with nothing more than sheer numbers and brute strength. We must also wonder if any of the large prehistoric animals of this ancient time could have been used in this construction of this massive ancient monument. If they did utilize the large animals of the time, it would help explain how the largest and heaviest stones were moved without modern technology. Once this vast construction project was complete, possibly after hundreds if not thousands of years, there would have been more people available for farming and food production. This would of course lead to an increase in the general population. This increase of population would make it necessary for the immigration into new lands for resources and living space. Which brings us right back to what we see in the fossil record of Neanderthal moving northward out of northern Africa into the Eurasian landmass, and then into the later into the southern parts of Europe. This brings us to the next part of the story, with the traditional belief that this great Lord of Light and his equally heavenly companions that quickly followed him were not only interested in bringing freedom and imparting divine knowledge to humanity, but they were also interested in and primarily driven by their sexual lust and want for the fair daughters of man. This next part of the story we will explore in the next video. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and subscribe for future videos.